Hi, everybody. Welcome to Excess Exceed. That's still the name of the show. It hasn't changed. On this show, I, Gearface, who's not very good at Exceed, have conscripted through nefarious means an expert to teach me a character of their choice. Today, I'm sitting down with Reggie to learn about Mole
Hello.
Knight. Hello, Reggie. Thank you so much for being on the show.
No, thank you for having me. He has kidnapped my dog.
Yes,
That's the only reason I've agreed to do this.
that's true.
Uh,
Super cute dog, by the way. Excellent choice of
yeah,
dog. Quick
yeah.
disclaimer before we get started. We're going to be talking about playing to win on this show. If that's not interesting to you, if what we're talking about doesn't line up with how you want to play Exceed, if you prefer to play the cool Mimi fun things, please do play the cool Mimi fun things because Exceed is cool and fun. Um,
Also, I like to win. And if
yeah,
people play the cool Mimi fun things, my chances of winning get better.
that's actually an excellent point. So selfishly, please do play the cool Mimi fun things. Also, we're going to be talking about strategy in kind of absolute terms. Always do this, never do that. This is always correct. This is never incorrect. Or this is always incorrect. Uh,
That's rarely true.
that's never true. And these are the rules of Reggie's strategy with Mole Knight, not necessarily your rules. If
Yep.
you don't find this line of play interesting, and if you think you have a
Or
better one, I would
or
like
if
to
you
hear about
find
it.
it not effect if you find it not effective or you have a better one, please DM me. I like Mole Knight. I want my Mole Knight play to be as good as possible. So if you have suggestions or little tips and tricks, please give them to me. I'll
Yeah,
take them.
absolutely. So all that said, Reggie, the floor is yours. Tell me all about this weird kind of tubby. Uh, I get this weird tubby man.
So first thing you need to know is Mole Knight is from Australia. We know this because he's from Down Under.
Okay.
Okay, now that I've got the meme out of the way, Mole Knight is a in and out, hit and run sort of zoner character who then, once he's exceeded, for the cost of 4 gauge, he becomes a much heavier brawler type character. This is accomplished through the use of his ability and through the fact that his cards just have good numbers on them. Uh, so I think I'll start by going over his ability. So, start of the game. You have a burrow and you have Mole Knight, and they both share the same normal starting position at the start of the game. I've got them
Okay.
separate just for viewing
So we
purposes.
start out right here then. Okay, gotcha.
Start at range 4. Uh, so, you begin with the burrow in your space, and as an action, you may place your burrow onto a space at range 3 and draw a card. So, essentially, you can take the prepare action and set your burrow.
Yep.
Why do you care about where your burrow is? Because when you initiate a strike, after setting your attack, you may declare that your attack has before, if your burrow is unoccupied, advance or retreat until you are in its space. So, say, uh, starting positions, I put the burrow there. Ryu doesn't step onto the burrow immediately. Uh, I can then declare that I initiate a strike and declare that I am gaining the before effect. I'm doing a mole strike. I'm burrowing. So then my attack would gain before, if your burrow is unoccupied, advance or retreat until you are in its space. So the purpose this serves a couple, but the main one is it just lets you move. It lets you be there. So it means that you can play attacks that are incredibly above curve, 7 speed attacks at range 4. It also means you can play a very slow attack and try and underspeed, which answers the things that answer the fast things.
Right.
So if I play focus here, most characters, the only thing that's going to deal with the focus is another focus. Because they're otherwise, I'm just going to underspeed their attack and come in and pulp them.
Right, because this is a
They can
this is a
also.
before effect. This doesn't happen when you reveal the card the way that like
Nope.
Hazama's would, for example. This is something that happens when it goes off in the stack. You will just appear
Yep.
here. Okay. Interesting.
When your speed comes up, it's a before trigger. Importantly, because it's a before trigger, any other before triggers you have, you may order them in whatever order.
Right.
So Mole Knight has a belly slide, which has before advance 1. So you might go, I'll use my Mole Knight trigger, and then I'll use belly slide, which means that the burrow is empty. So you may makes it easier for you to use your ability again later.
Right. Okay.
Alternately, you could do belly slide and then burrow for
Okay.
whatever reason.
So
If you
for
don't
just
want to corner
yeah,
yourself.
right. In this position, avoid cornering yourself. So just a little bit of fine tuning positioning control. If you did like assault, you would have kind of the same effect with the close. Um,
Yeah, but
if
you'd
if
always
that
end up
mattered for some
kill.
reason, yeah, you'd always end up in the
Yeah.
same spot.
Though a fun one is, say we're in, range 2, and I play dive, declaring the before. Still indicates that I'm playing a fast thing, because I still get the bonus of, moving one close, makes my grasps hit, makes my burrow digs hit,
Right.
but also means my dive also hits, because I can do the dive before advance 3, which gets me the dodge, and then die before go to the burrow.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
playing around with those before effects, it's only important on a few cards. It doesn't come up all the time. But if you can get the extra value off it, it's really effective.
Interesting.
Also, say the burrow is in my space and I've got one of those before effects. So I could use the before effect and then use the burrow to come back.
Oh, so the check on whether your burrow is unoccupied or not doesn't occur when you flip either. It's at the before trigger timing as well.
Yep, it's when you trigger that before effect. It's
Interesting.
before
Okay.
if your burrow is in. It's not if your burrow is unoccupied before. It's before if your burrow is unoccupied.
Right.
It's a bit of
Okay. So if my
clause stuff.
if my opponent had
Yep.
a before pull or push effect and they were out speeding me and I was standing on my burrow, it would have the same effect that now it's unoccupied, I can move to it.
Yes, but you have to declare it when you initiate the strike.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you'd have to, say it. But sometimes there's no real harm in it. But
Right.
then your opponent knows, oh, they're declaring a before. A fun one is if the burrow is in, range 3, the opponent is on top of the burrow. You play spike. You declare you're going to the burrow. If the opponent doesn't move off the burrow, the spike hits. The opponent plays, say, assault. They come in, they hit
And
you for
Spike
4.
still hits.
Yep. I mean, you
Interesting.
trade with the spike instead of winning clean, but
Right.
that's better than losing outright to the assault.
It's one of the situations where Spike's guard actually matters. Interesting. So yeah,
Yep.
you can uh,
Or,
kind of option select your way through that.
or a fun one, before going to the burrow, range 1 spike.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see that.
Yep. So there's a few little fun ones there. And then once you the best cards to utilize the burrow, in my opinion, though, are Cross and Headbutt,
Okay.
which is his force special. Season 4, all of them have one force special.
Right.
So Cross is really good because it's fast. It beats other crosses, which are the evasive thing. So you come in, you hit with Cross, and then you retreat back out. So the opponent's unlikely to hit you back. You've moved off the burrow. You've done 3 damage unreactably,
Mhm.
like without getting hit back, and you've generated a gauge.
Right.
Uh,
And your burrow is still free for the next strike because you've left it again, right?
yep, because you've moved off it.
Okay.
And then headbutt is similar but slightly different. So headbutt, 6 speed, so also beats crosses. It's 4 power, so it does slightly more damage. It does cost a force, but it has hit, push 2, and then it's got an option select. So you can advance 2 and gain advantage, or you can retreat, or you could retreat 1. So if you need to dodge out of the way of something,
Right.
you can do that.
So
You can gain advantage. Yep.
so this beats almost every normal in the game with the right positioning because
If if
you're stunning out
you
anything fast for the most part. You can dodge sweep with the retreat effect.
if you're at range 2, it beats every normal in the game.
Yeah.
Uh barring some positioning nonsense, like if you don't have the room to,
Push
yeah,
far enough, right?
yeah,
Okay,
but it's very, very good. And again, it's basically free damage. It's generating your gauge. It gains you advantage in a surprising number of cases.
sure.
And then because you push two and then you advance two, or is it close to whatever? It's that. So that's really good. So that you have two copies of cross, two copies of headbutt, uh, two copies of grasp, two copies of burrow and two copies of block. With that, you should be able to generate 4 gauge pretty easily.
Okay, and that's the game plan: is exceed as quick as possible.
Exceed as quick as possible because your exceed mode. When you exceed, you may place your burrow on. When you exceed, you flip your burrow, and then when you would use your action to place your burrow, you can put it at ranges 2, 3, or 4. Same as on front. So like front side, but you get extra choice on where you put it.
Okay, so the front side ability is not onto a space within range 3. It's range 3 exactly. So from this position,
Yes,
I can move my
you
burrow
could.
here, and that's it. When I'm on front
Yes,
side,
from
got it.
starting, that's your only position from turn one,
Okay, and
and
then
then
so
oh
when I flip over, I wind up with a little bit more, actually quite a bit more positioning control over where I wanna put my
yeah,
burrows. Makes
so
it harder to run away from.
you can put your burrow there, you can put it there, there, there.
Right,
So that's as opposed to one space, it's 4.
right,
And this is in pretty like limited conditions because you can't if you move one space this way, it goes up to 5 an extra space. Like it's pretty good. But
right.
that's not even the good part. The good part is when you would gain your before now, you also get +2 power for doing it.
Oh, okay. And so all of a sudden
So
he's hitting really, really hard. And this isn't just for his specials and ultras. This is his attacks.
yep, he has to initiate, but just play whatever. Fantastic one is your sweeps are suddenly super consistent. Like
Yep.
in this positioning, you initiate with sweep, your opponent plays cross. Initiate with sweep, saying you're using the burrow. Opponent plays cross, and then they eat 8 damage.
Yep. And that 8 is enough
Uh,
to beat their sweep. It's enough to break their focus.
yep.
That's dangerous. Okay.
And positioning wise, you can do this in a lot of ways where you're out of range from mid speeds, or even if you're just at range 1. It's just a somewhat free +2 power.
Right. So and in that position that you just described, like if they dive to avoid it, like they don't really have much option at all among the normals at least. If they dive, they wind up here. They haven't crossed
Yep,
over me because they've outsped me. I didn't wind up here first, and then I hit them with the sweep anyway for 8.
correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
So
you
that
take
that's
5
dangerous.
there.
Right,
Yep, you take 5 there, but you hit for 8, and you've already hit for some amount of damage beforehand. So
right,
that's why I like to say he plays a nice hit and run game, and then because the hit and run game is safer and it's like uh less interactive, right?
right,
You can still do stuff about like sweep is an extreme example. A lot of the cards aren't going to be that monstrous with +2 power,
right. But
but
but I mean his kit is not incredibly low damage. I'm seeing a 5 here. I'm seeing a 5 here. A 4 here. Like these,
yeah,
he hits hard when he's succeeded.
oh yeah,
Okay,
yeah, he absolutely does. So so the game plan is you play the hit and run, you chip off some damage, whatever you chip off, get your exceed, and then it doesn't matter if you trade because you're ahead on life and you're trading with big numbers.
right. Okay,
So in theory, you could invert it. You could brawl first and then play hit and run. But I find it's less consistent to brawl first. And like you can mix it up. Like you've got a good tool to use at a situation. Use it. But I find that playing the hit and run game is just a more consistent way to get to a threatening end game.
right. Got it. So The way that you're describing it, it reminds me of beheaded play a little bit.
Yeah.
At least in terms of like overall game shape, maybe not what you're doing, but what you're trying to get to is the part where you make like just let like you've got the ball rolling enough. Now you can just make them blow up.
Yeah, so I consider Mole Knight to be a slightly earlier than late game character. You want to extend the game to late game because it 4 gauge is a lot of gauge. It
Yes.
takes getting to a late game for that, but you want to get there slightly faster than late game characters, which I find Mole Knight can do. Which is why I value him quite well into slower characters, like characters that don't have the aggression, or season 2 characters because they got to build up their engine.
Right.
Same with Beheaded. So characters like that they are similar in game plan shape.
Right.
Like they want to hit their peak. It takes a while for them to hit their peak, but when they do it just before the other ones that hit their peak late, and they are strong.
Okay. A season 2 character, for example, they've got most of their transforms in place, but they're still putting together some part of their engine. And then
Yeah,
right at that moment, Mole Knight is
Mole
saying,
Knight.
right now I'm exceeding, and that means that you're under pressure and I'm not anymore.
Yeah, the game is going to end in probably 3 strikes.
Gotcha.
Mole Knight initiating. So it is important to note Mole Knight can only do it on initiate, and he has to declare it.
Yeah.
So when you're not when you're playing against Mole Knight, you're not totally in the dark. You're never going to be blindsided by what he does. Because he aside from his tricksy movement, it is pretty honest. He's telling you he's doing it.
Right.
Like if I say I'll game the before, you can be pretty confident I'm not playing block push.
Sure. Yeah.
You can be pretty confident I'm not playing spike.
Right. Right. If you're doing that, you're you're attempting to hit them, right? And you're attempting to hit them at probably at the position that they're at.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna unless I'm like have an incredible cross read or something on the block push or something. It's not going to
yeah,
yeah, it's not going to interact in that way. So you also mentioned the underslowing thing,
yes.
or out
So
slowing thing. Yeah,
it's pretty rare. It's only really viable with your slows, and really mostly only viable with focus. Because if you play, say, a sweep, you're going to outspeed the opponent's sweep because you win the speed tie.
you're still
You play
initiating,
a
sure,
you play a belly slide, you're going to outspeed the opponent's
right?
sweep because
And
it's 2.
and like I mean the way I'm thinking about this is that like at this range, most characters have kind of the move or don't move mix up between dive and sweep or whatever. If you're coming
Yep.
in, they are uh, they're they are likely to play sweep because you're coming in. Period. I mean,
Yes.
I see that you've got diving dig as an option
The
that
range. Yeah, range 1 spike.
right.
And landing a diving dig is brutal, but I personally find it doesn't happen very often. Because well, you might play one diving dig, but you keep one alive as a threat forever.
Right.
Because having access to that threat is often more valuable than playing that threat.
Right. It makes them afraid to play their slow options. But the reason I'm asking is that for the
Yep.
most part, Spike not being online at this particular position, but diving dig being online, if they are if I say I'm Mole Knight and I say I'm moving to my burrow, they have a fairly good reason to respond with sweep just because it's a stable defensive shape that works pretty well. I don't want to trade with my own sweep, but focus lets me dodge and then get in, and
Under
it's probably the only card that does.
So you have a few things that actually beat sweep, which is really funny. So you declare it. So you've got your sweep, obviously.
Right.
You got your focus, sorry, and your diving dig.
Yep.
So under slows is a range 1 spike. You also have headbutt and cross.
Right.
both of which would beat sweep. So sweep is actually kind of a rough one to play. I find most people are probably going to open with a focus instead. Focus, at least there, trades with your focus and trades with the headbutt.
Right. Okay.
Loses to the cross and loses to the diving dig, but the cross you're probably going to lose to.
Right.
Like that's
It's pretty tough to deal with a speed 6 retreat option uh, at range 4.
yeah, like
Or 6 or wherever you are when you're doing this.
yeah. So a few characters do have answers because if you read its cross, you know where he's going to end up
Sure,
because
you
you know
can.
he's going to come in and then he's going to go out. So you can go, okay, I have my tools that answer
Right. So
things. You cross catches, but you
yeah,
have to have the read.
guarded projectile, some kind of Tatsu. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but I was just gonna go through Mole Knight's kit in particular. So that's his ability and his general game plan shape.
Gotcha.
So in his kit, so he has his two ultras, Erupt and Cave In. So obviously they're not the highest priority in the kit because you want to be using your exceed mode, and playing an ultra delays you from getting there.
Right.
Um, Erupt is a 2 to 4 hits like a truck, but it's slow. I find I don't use this. I don't end up using this card very often because it's 3 gauge and it's pretty specific range. Like there are erupt setups where unless the opponent plays very specific tools, it's hard. You can't beat it.
Right.
Like in the board state I've assembled, unless the opponent dives over me, if I declare the burrow, uh, like there's nothing much the opponent can do about it.
Right. So
But
by the
yep,
time, so you're talking about these ultras as a pre-exceed consideration, I assume partially because by the time you've exceeded and then you've built up 3 gauge again, the opponent should probably be dead.
yeah, or very very close to
Right.
yeah.
So
In which case,
even
hitting for
after
10.
right, yeah, even after exceed, you're like, okay, well, I'll exceed first. That's 4 gauge, and then if I manage to assemble another 3, I'll hit him with it. Then, well, that at that point maybe play grasp for the remaining 3 life they probably have, unless you've because if you're hitting,
5.
yeah, if you're that's true,
Yeah,
that's true. If you're hitting to get the gauge in the first place for this
yeah,
ultra, that means you're hitting, and that means that they're probably dying.
yeah. So
Gotcha,
it's a tough one to justify. Look,
gotcha,
it's
gotcha.
not bad. Look, it's a little rough to land, but it's 8 pound. It's a 10 delta card, you
Right,
know. But the boost on it, molten armor, is actually quite useful because it means your burrow positioning can be a lot more flexible. So now, in this position, this board state setup, if I have molten armor and I declare the burrow, suddenly now grasp is another option. Now diving dig is another threat.
right,
So more things become a threat. And it means if you are it also has the first time this strike you are hit, after hit effects, deal 2 non lethal damage. So it means even if you are trading, you are making it worse for the opponent.
right.
Suddenly your sweep is 8 delta without any other power boost, without
Does
any other boosts on it.
does non-lethal damage contribute toward a stun effect? If I take the hit
Yes.
from the sweep or from my
So,
opponent with a sweep, I'm dealing 8 damage. It just can't kill them.
yes, but importantly, the timing of this, because it is when you are hit.
Right.
So the opponent's attack is already executing. So they cannot be stun is only checked when a card is validated.
Right.
So
The reason I'm asking is recently I wrapped up a lesson with D on Guile, and we were talking a lot about Shades of
the
Glory.
shades,
Yeah,
yeah, yep,
and
this would
reactive
matter
stuns
for
can
the
be important.
shades.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, so it matter for anything that checks stun, yeah, absolutely can stun. It's
Got
also
it.
just 2 extra damage on extra range.
Yep.
So quite useful. Also, Mole Knight can sometimes just use the force. Like moving yourself can be a useful thing to do.
Right. Because
Especially because
you're
the burrow. Yep.
you're kind of deep. You're setting up a position and then you're cashing out the position, right? In a way that all right. Well, now I'm here. I hit you with the thing, I have to spend at least one turn either moving this or moving myself back or something, right?
Yeah, unless you do it within the attack, you have to spend time doing it yourself. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
That's why there's a lot of value in attacks that do move you off the burrow,
Right.
which all four of his five specials do. The four I would expect to hit from a burrow, move you off the burrow.
Right. Right. Okay, that
But
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, absolutely, you're going to be spending time. And also, you've established a threat with the burrow, so sometimes you just want to move out of the way so the opponent can't threaten you with anything.
Right.
I
Right.
set up. I don't want to be Hadokened, for example, against Ryu. And then yeah, he doesn't generally use it to change cards because his ability lets him draw a card when he does it. He
Right.
can prepare plus basically, which is uh, very frustrating. It often results in Mole Knight getting more than a few EX attacks,
Mhm.
uh, just because he has, by advancing his game plan, he also has really solid card flow.
Right. So when
Uh,
your opponent gives you a turn, you're able to uh, push yourself forward to victory, but also not really lose that many resources overall either.
exactly.
Gotcha.
And then, so his other Ultra, Cave In. Um, I'm more likely to play this one before Exceeding because it is only 2 gauge, and also because it's evil. It's an evil card. Um, so I'm more likely to play this one on defense than offense. Um, just because at worst it's 3 armor on defense.
Right.
Uh, but if the opponent is within range of this attack, when they begin moving, they cannot move. Uh, so at range 3, no assaults, no dives. Uh,
Right.
have fun.
Right. Okay.
Uh, no crosses for your empty cross out. And then it draws 2 cards. Like it's just a very functionally is just a very rude card. If
Yeah.
it hits, it's probably hitting for 4 and then not getting hit back. It also trades with Grasp at range 1 because it's got 3 armor.
Right. So the 3 armor uh, is not doesn't make it totally safe to things. You know, if it is only speed 1,
Yeah,
if they are responding, or rather if they're initiating with a very slow card, you still have to make the read. You can't just jam that card down.
yeah. Cave-In is not free, but it is uh very safe. Like at worst, you can play it as an if you desperately need an extra 3 armor to not die.
Sure.
If you need an extra block, you go Cave-In.
Sure.
I really like Cave-In though, as if I'm in Exceed mode, it's pretty easy to get 2 gauge. You know, you're probably going to get 2 gauge before the game ends in Exceed mode. And then EX in Exceed mode, it becomes just another copy of Sweep.
Right.
You know, it's 4 armor. If you use the burrow in Exceed mode, that's what 7 power if it's EX'd. Like it's just a very formidable tool then.
Right. Uh,
Uh,
is there any value in putting a boost down to make this card safer, like something like defend, for example, or are you ceding too much tempo to set this strike up by doing that? Is it just better to jam it down when you have the read?
I think it's better to jam it when you have the read because it's not that good.
Right.
Like it's good, but it's not super punishing when it punishes. Like it only hits for 4.
Right.
And defend in particular, Mole Knight can make good use of because he has the movement shenanigans. He can make Spike a lot more consistent,
Right.
particularly in Exceed mode. You can hit for 7 ignoring armor, which yeah,
Which is a lot. Yeah. That's an ultra
yeah,
right there.
yeah. So
Right.
like it's not bad, and I could see reasons to do it against characters that are highly mobile but hit slightly more than 3.
Right.
Uh, but and also you need to be wary if you do this at range 1. The opponent, if the opponent plays dive, you've just made them hit you.
Right.
So if you've got the
Right.
re,
Right. That's
yeah,
true. Okay, that's kind of funny.
yeah. It's happened to me before. It is funny, because because the opponent sometimes will just play dive at range 1 to get over you. Sometimes,
Right.
like I do it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Um, and
Dodge an important slow attack that you're trying to filter for or something.
yeah. And then on the boost of this, undermine. So at the start, you boost this at the start of your turn. Choose one, discard this card. If you do, deal 4 non-lethal damage to the opponent on your burrow, or move your burrow 1 space. So basically, it's a boost that punishes the opponent for standing on your burrow.
Right. Which is the way that you would one of the ways that you would stop Mole Knight from kind of initiating his game plan in the first place is you just stay on top of it.
Yeah, the issue I have with this boost is you play this, and then it has to stay around till the next turn.
Right.
Because you don't do anything when you play it straight away. And the opponent probably wants to be initiating into Mole Knight anyway. So
Right.
it's a lot more meaningful when Mole Knight is on front side, when he can only place the burrow in one spot. But if Mole Knight's in Exceed mode, just move your burrow.
Right.
You can't.
You can do it yourself.
You've got extra spots. You'll draw a card doing it as well.
Right.
So Undermine has its purpose, but I personally think if the opponent is playing smart and standing on the burrow, you you're either on front side and you're in trouble anyway, and this isn't going to help you much because they're probably going to initiate anyway, or you're in Exceed mode, in which case you should just move the burrow yourself.
Right. Okay.
And then, yeah, so, and also just generally useful as a 2-force card.
Right. So
as an ultra.
Both of these, like this one, has a very playable boost on it, which is kind of convenient because the ultra is not that useful. This is a more usable attack, maybe a slightly less usable boost, but neither of them sound like another lesson that I just finished up was Dan on with Rose. So I'm thinking about ultras in terms of like season 3 ultras where they're a pretty integral part of your game plan. These sound like
they are not Mole Knight's win condition.
Yeah,
they're
they're smaller parts of his game plan, and you can just spend them if you need them.
Yeah, if you land them, that's nice. That's good. You might. It's probably going to put you a way into winning the game, but I don't think they are integral to winning the game.
Okay, that makes sense.
So which end am I going to start with? Let's go slow to fast. So, belly slide. It's sort of like a focus, except worse. But it's okay because it's got armor. It's 4 power, which means it's 6 power in Exceed mode, and its range is range whatever when you're exceeded.
Right.
When you're initiating, it's range whatever because you're Mole Knight.
Right.
It's also really useful because it has that before advance 1. So even if the opponent's initiating into you and you're stuck on the burrow, say, it lets you get off it because it's 6 defenses. The odds of the opponent stunning it aren't fantastic.
Right.
So regardless, it might make it a bit easier to get off the burrow. And then hit draw a card is never bad. It's a draw card.
Right.
And then the boost on it before advance 2 means you can do some movement shenanigans. You burrow and then you play a card with move on it, and then you have that boost in play, and then you gotta make sure you order all your triggers right.
Right.
It's not bad. It's also like, say we're in this positioning, something like this. If I declare the before here and I have that in play, I can still play spike. Before.
Hey.
Yeah. So it can let you do some silly things, but you have to be really conscious of what you're setting up when you do it.
Right. It's not something like hand shape matters. You're looking to confirm a specific attack with this. You're not just putting it down to make your stuff threatening.
Yeah.
Does it also have some utility in situations where, like, because I mean, what I'm noticing is that this is also slightly redundant with burrow in some situations.
Yes.
Where like I can move in anyway. So if my burrow is otherwise occupied at the moment, from Ryu being
Yes.
on it. This is kind of like the makeshift version of the burrow for like a turn.
Yeah, or on defense.
Right,
Because you
right,
can't
right.
use your burrow on defense, this is sort of like having the burrow.
Gotcha.
Like, it's, turn one, say Ryu is first player and I'm second. I can boost this when it comes to mine, and now I can do the cross thing. I can do assault in, you know,
Right,
which which means I have a bit more nonsense I can work with.
right. Okay.
Whereas normally on defense, you can't. Well, Knight can't use the burrow on defense. So having something there, even if it then becomes redundant when you can use the burrow, still is good enough.
Sure.
It's the only downside is it does cost a force, so you got to be careful about what you're spending. Uh, you go through cards pretty quickly because you draw a lot of cards as Mole Knight,
Right,
but it's rarely outright bad to play. Like you can put it into play, and most of the time it's like, okay, but you should know what you want to do with it.
right. I'm noticing that uh, almost half of or half of Mole Knight's boosts have a force cost, and
Yeah,
for what I'm getting out of them in some cases, that it seems like they're slightly overcosted
yeah, they are a
boosts.
little expensive, but you are generating a lot of resources to begin with, so it's not a big deal.
Right.
You are drawing a fair few cards, but they are have a bit of a price to them.
Okay.
Um, Next up is Block Push, Mole Knight's one and only special that does not move him. Uh, it's a slow fireball. It's really useful, say, this sort of positioning. If you initiate with Block Push, you can be confident that the opponent is going to be moved off the burrow.
Right.
Because either they come in or you push them off unless they play Focus. If they
Right.
play Focus, they're the real villain. Um,
But then
but
it's one focus that they can't play later on when you're
trying to,
underslowing them with your own focus or something.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And also, another thing is, you can you can place the burrow in at that range, which means it's either side of you. So in this sort of positioning, suddenly, if the opponent is down spikes, or you don't think they have a spike, if you declare block push, there's almost nothing they can do to stop you.
Right, because it has so much guard on it.
So much got, and it's speed too. So
Oh,
if you have EX,
so
yep,
interesting because this is something that I've started to pick up is the kind of guard thresholds for melee and for projectile ranges are a little bit different. That most guardy fireballs, most slow fireballs are going to have 5 guard. 6 is for melee
yeah,
range. This is
yeah,
something that
4 or 5,
this is something you can
yeah,
regularly play in melee range by moving away from it anyway. So I can, you know, I'm not necessarily trying to guard through uh, a strong fireball. I might be trying to guard through sweep with this and then back up.
yeah. Well,
Got it.
if you initiate, you're not having to worry. If you're backing up, you're not worrying about sweep.
Right. Oh, right. No,
But
of
yeah,
course. Yeah, you're you can only do it on initiation. But the fact that you
yeah,
have to you're doing it in melee range in the first place, the 6 guard can be more important than it might be at extreme ranges
yeah.
when you're playing the fireball meta.
Like assault with fierce. That's not at all out of the realm of possibility. They come in, they hit you for 6, and then you retreat out and you hit them and then you push them.
Right.
And suddenly their advantage is a lot less so.
Right. Okay.
It's also just good because say you don't really know what you want to defend with. At range 3, this isn't terrible. It beats sweep, which is always nice. Like might not beat much else, but it's not. I would say block push is probably Molnot's most conditional special
Okay.
because it is that fireball. Everything else work. If I put the burrow at range 1, everything else, if I move to it, works.
Right.
But block push does not. So it is important because it's different to the rest of the kit, but because it's different to the rest of the kit, when the other stuff works well, it doesn't necessarily.
It doesn't. So
In
so
exchange, yep,
if everything is coming up Mole Knight, if everything I'm doing is going exactly the way that I want it to, I might not have a huge amount of use for this card. But
yeah,
there's going to be a lot of times when my opponent is conscious of what I'm trying to do and is stopping me, and that's kind of when this card is useful.
yeah. They stand on the burrow, and you go, I'm gonna gain the before, and they go, okay, they just stand on the burrow, and then you initiate block push, and they have to think about block push, they have to think about spike, they have to think about assault. Like, it's a
Right.
nice another level to the range 3 mix up as well.
Got it.
And at range 4, it's just, not many. It's an extra card at range 3 to 6. Not many characters, outside of season 3, the fireball meta is not as strong.
Right.
Um, on top of that, it has what I consider a very solid boost for the late game. +2 armor, +2 guard for 1 force is actually pretty good. Assault with suddenly has 6 delta and is more consistent. Which, if you're trying to end the game, or you are trying to preserve a lead, so you burrow in, say you play assault using the burrow. Suddenly, you're trading better with the assault, and you're sort of conserving that lead with it.
Right. And the reason that this isn't incredibly valuable in the early game part of this game plan is that I'm not really trying to trade at all in the early game, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Gotcha.
And in the early game, block push can be a bit more useful because late game you tend to stay in close more. You're not doing the hit and run thing.
You're brawling more, right?
Um,
Right.
yeah, but because you're hitting and running, you might end up at ranges. If the burrow's at range 2 from the opponent and you cross out, you're at 5, and suddenly now, block push is actually pretty good.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's not at all like, it's a good card when it's a good card, sort of thing.
Right. Sure.
Highly, highly conditional. The boost, very solid in the late game. Same reason almost as Cave In. Sometimes 2 armor is just 2 armor. Like, that's nothing to sneeze at.
Right. Yeah. It makes your trades higher value. Your it's making stuff safer. Definitely a lot of value there that I can see. Again, though, I mean the comparison that I'm making would be to defend, which is also 4 effective guard, but uh, 1 in
1
3
armor.
instead. Yeah.
Yeah, what? And I think defend is all the normal boosts, despite being free, are probably close to needing to cost a force, or probably should cost a force anyway.
Got it.
So, in my opinion, at least, like, they are very good.
Right,
So,
definitely. But
yeah,
the upside of this compared to defend is you have 1 more armor in exchange for 1 guard, which is better, right? I mean, I'm
yeah,
almost always happy to have a higher delta. The super niche situations where I get hit by an ignore armor effect, but not an ignore guard effect, notwithstanding. But again, it is 1 force, which and defend is not. So
yeah.
I'm kind of paying 1 force for 1 armor, and that could be a trade I'm willing to make, or it could not.
You're also paying 1 force to not use a copy of Spike.
Very true, very true. And I have redundancies. I can, depending on the matchup, I can say, well, my block pushes are going to be uh mostly
Useful in this.
right in
Yeah,
this
they're not.
way.
They.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're going to be dead in this matchup. Okay, I can just use Stonewall and not worry about defend. Or you go, block pusher is probably going to be very useful in this matchup. I'll focus on using defend.
right,
Or, the opponent drops a certain card and you go, oh, okay, I work with that.
right.
So then,
Spike is no longer as useful because all of his blocks and focuses are down, or something like that.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Um, Mole Knight's third card, Diving Dig. So it's a whatever range because you're Mole Knight. 5 power, 3 speed, ignore guard, retreat 1, and the opponent must discard a card at random.
Wow,
This card is
that's
brutal.
brutal. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah. Yep. Uh, Even without using the burrow, this is a card that's really good to staple Stonewall onto. Like, I spoke earlier about the range 1. You're in Exceed mode, the burrow's on the other side of the opponent.
Right.
You know, you staple a stone wall onto a diving dig. That's 4 defenses on this card at 3 speed, and it hits for 7, ignoring guard, and forces a
A
discard.
discard, yeah. So when I asked earlier about the utility of stapling a defend or something like that to cave in, and you sort of talked me down from it, is part of it just because there's a much better target?
Yeah, diving dig. If you add bonus speed to it, though you don't add bonus speed to this kit a lot because you are futzing with range, which is essentially giving you bonus speed.
Which is kind of like speed, of
Uh,
course.
yeah. So you don't add bonus speed, but if you're adding bonus speed, diving dig is the place to have it. Or bonus defenses, diving dig or assault would be the places I'd want to see them. I'd want to see you make use of them. Uh, it's good. It's a range 1 spike. Any kit that has a range 1 spike should be happy to have it. You
Definitely.
know, it means the opponent can't just come into range 1 and go, I don't have to be worried about you playing spikes, which isn't true against Mole Knight anyway. But
Right, but this could be true uh, even without the dig in play, or without the burrow in play. You could
yep,
conceivably hit with this to make them afraid to initiate into you.
yep.
Um,
You can
and
use it on defense. You can, and it moves you off the burrow if you hit with it. Yep.
right, and a discard effect is like on top of that is a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And if you're exceeded, it's 7 power.
right, I was actually just about to ask about that. Um, we've been talking about the printed power, and it sounds like, or we've been talking about the cards in terms of their printed power, and it sounds like from what you're saying that for most of the game, this is actually the power that they're going to have.
Yeah, you
The late game exceed effect. Um, it it's that's a bonus for when I get it. I shouldn't really be evaluating that this card is
yeah,
secretly 6 power for
bel-
most of the game or anything.
yeah. It'll be if that card is 6 power for most of the game, you've made a mistake basically
Okay,
because once you're exceeded, you fully have the capability to end the game quickly.
right. In
Unless
part
you've
because
somehow
everything
you
has the +2 power, of course. Right.
exactly. So if you've played like both blocks and you've got 2 other gauge somehow and you've done like next to no damage to the opponent, okay, but those are more minority cases.
Right.
Sometimes normally you'll have dealt 10 damage, something around that before you exceed, or more sort of thing.
Right.
And once you do that, it's 20 damage, which is not at all hard to hit with +2 power on things. Your sweep is more consistent. Your assaults are 6 power and more consistent. Like the ability doesn't just add power; it always adds consistency to your attacks. You can be more confident you're going to land your thing.
Right.
Um, Now the thing with diving dig, and the reason often don't play any in a game. One, I want to keep one alive always because that's a threat. That's
Right.
a range 1 spike. And then uh, the reason I don't play any as an attack is because tunneling is a fantastic way to start your game.
Yeah.
Advance or retreat up to 3, then if you are on your burrow, add this card to your gauge. What this actually says is add this card to your gauge.
Right. This is a key charge basically with some extra text on it.
Yep. And the extra text sometimes matters, but most of the time you're just using it for the key charge effect.
Okay.
Because your Mole Knight getting to 4 gauge is incredible for you. Uh, so tunneling is incredible for that.
Right.
That's
So
one less thing you have to interact with at all.
so on turn 1, if I don't have any useful threats to try to hit with, um, tunneling, advance or retreat 0. I'm on my burrow. Add this card to gauge. That kind of thing.
So Mole Knight, if you turn 1, if you're Mole Knight, I'm a big believer in mulligan for useful cards, obviously, and then typically useful defensive cards, and then turn 1, place the burrow at range 3.
Okay.
It draws you 2 cards, so you're at max hand size. The burrow is a threat, so the opponent has to do something about it immediately. Um, I find tunneling is more conditional, or if I'm going second. If I'm going second, I find tunneling very useful
Got it.
because you're not going to place the burrow because well, you might, but it draws you over hand size,
And
and
you'll discard.
you sort
Okay.
of yeah, and you draw a lot of resources, but you want to use a lot of them as well.
Right.
So you, I find it's tough as Mole Knight to set the burrow on turn one.
Okay. That makes
As
sense.
the second player. But as the first player, yeah, I almost always turn one, set the burrow, draw two, uh, make the opponent deal with it while I have a handful of good cards.
Right.
Um, yeah,
And as far as key charge effects go, I mean, this is a pretty playable copy. It like again, looking at season 3,
phenomenal.
yeah, it's not on axe kick, it's not on donkey kick. It like as you said, a range one spike is an important thing to keep in my kit, and I'm very happy to have it. But it's not like a dominant card at the range it's played at. It's part of a mix up. It's not just a button I click. So I
Yeah,
can put that down and not feel devastated that I lost my copy of Axe Kick or something like that.
yeah, and it's also a good one too because it has another effect on it, right? So, say
Right.
the opponent's in range one, they've crossed up my burrow. I can then just advance two.
Right. And generally
I
Mole Knight doesn't really want to be on his burrow because he can't then strike from it.
initiate, correct.
Initiate
But
from
if
it,
you've
right.
got yeah, but if you've got something in your hand that so say like this has occurred. Say I've got like cross in my hand or headbutt. I'm happy to do this.
Right.
You know, I get a card, get that. But also it's just nice because sometimes like it's late game. You can't afford to take the risk on a diving dig. You can just use it as an advance three
Right.
for sufficient movement. Yeah, so it's a very multifaceted boost that like it's hard to find a situation where it's bad.
Got
Okay,
it. Got it. Got
it,
it.
and then you've got the most a force special that earns its force cost. Probably the strongest force special in season 4.
Yeah.
Uh, Headbutt is a card that loses to nothing. Like if you play it in its preferred positioning, it loses to no normals.
Right. Which is very rare.
Yeah. Uh, and, that's before you include the burrow. So now it's 6 speed and moving in, or you exceed, and now it's 6 power, which is a lot of power to be putting on an attack at 6 speed.
Definitely.
Um, don't worry about the boost. Uh, you don't want to play the boost. It's not a bad boost, but Headbutt is just kit definingly good.
Right. 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 In terms of this option select, if I have stunned my opponent and I'm not worried about the reprisal, am I pretty much always choosing to advance and get advantage, or are there times when I would want to retreat so that I could do,
So,
speed curve shenanigans with my extra range?
so I like having the advantage. Um, it's just a punishing thing to do.
Sure.
You can reposition the burrow. So, like if I'm in exceed mode, I come in, I do this, or say the burrow's at range one. Come in, and I hit them, and I stun them, and I push them to. And I let's move back a space so they end up there. Anyway, and then I advance two. Then I can reposition the burrow to range there, draw me some cards. Because headbutts cost you two cards, right? You've played
Sure.
headbutt and you've spent a force.
Right.
So you recoup the cost and you reposition the burrow. Or you go, or if you're on the other side of the opponent, you go, okay, and now I'm going to boost assault and run away.
Right.
So
So
it's dependent on your.
with
Yep.
that advantage, I'm pretty likely to have a way to set up my burrow anyway without having to retreat off of it. There's
Yeah,
probably something else that I can do somewhere in my kit that will keep that threat alive.
yeah, absolutely. Like you know, you could belly slot, like depending on positioning, you could like, so say we're in this, I've pushed the opponent into the corner, you can declare burrow strike And if the opponent's out of grasps, your cross is free here.
Right.
Or if they have grasps and you played focus, they've hit you for 1 and you hit them for 6.
Right.
So, yeah, it is normally better to gain the advantage, but you might find a position where it's like, oh, I would actually really like to retreat here because I don't want to end up at that close range position and I don't have something to capitalize.
Right.
But most of the time, if you're retreating, it's because you're avoiding damage. You're avoiding the reprisal.
Yeah, I mean that's half of the thing that makes this card unbeatable against the normals on initiation is that you can back up. So use it for that purpose.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And yeah, it's incredible. It's another copy of Cross, but it hits harder and it can gain advantage. And if you've heard me complain about Cross before, you should understand how powerful I consider that to be.
Definitely.
That's yeah.
Yeah.
Then you have yep.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just gonna reiterate what you had said. Pretty much. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to move on to the next card, but like headbutt. Play it. Your opponent's going to play around it as best they can. I feel sorry for them. If you're playing against Mole Knight, expect to get hit by headbutt at least once a game.
Right.
Like that's just the reality of the situation. If you can force them to play it in suboptimal positions, like they landed at range 1, then they lose to the focus or they have to take the worst decision. That's fantastic.
Right.
Yeah,
Being able to trade with headbutt is a rarity. So be
yeah,
happy when it happens.
yeah.
Right.
And it's a 6 speed. It's gonna hit you.
Yeah.
That's. And then we have Burrow-Dig. Burrow-Dig looks a lot more unimpressive than it is.
Okay.
So Burrow-Dig, 7 speed, which is immediately useful on a character with his ability. So you move, and then on hit you draw a card and advance 2. So that probably doesn't get you out of the range of a lot of things.
Right.
Like it looks very unimpressive. But what it's done is Burrow's in a good position. I'm in a good position to use the Burrow. Yeah, like it's a simple card. It probably doesn't get you out of range of things that hit, but like sometimes you don't need to.
Right.
And in Exceed mode, it's 5 power at speed 7.
And I mean, it draws me a card, which is cool. It also seems like it forms a mix up with a handful of other things that
Yep.
like this. Like I can play a fast slow mix up basically at any range,
Yep.
because I have Burrow and I have access to at least a fast card and Grasp too.
You
I
have
guess.
you have yeah, you have Grasp in this, you have Diving Dig as a mid speed, you have the slows and belly slide, and then Cross and Headbutt are sort of outside the mix up because they're sort of they serve the mid speed spot,
Right.
but they're absurdly fast to be serving the mid speed
Right.
spot.
They're too fast to beat everything.
Yeah,
Right.
barring very specific counters, and normally those only handle Cross.
Right.
So yeah, Burrow-Dig is a phenomenal tool, and it's just great to have another Speed 7, because Speed 7s are often super useful to check stuff on defense.
Right.
They're also good for ending games. You have twice as many Speed 7 cards, so if the opponent's at 3 life or 5 life because you're Mole Knight, that's twice as many things you could draw into and just end the game with.
Right. So, I mean, just the redundancy with Grasp for endgame situations is kind of valuable on its own, even without everything else.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then, in terms of the boost on it, it has Lost Treasure, so you return a special or ultra from your discard pile to your hand, then shuffle your discard. Don't worry about that text. Do not draw at the end of your turn. This reads Return Headbutt.
Yeah. Every single time, pretty much.
Yeah, unless your opponent is super vulnerable to something like diving dig,
Right.
most of the time, it's the three you're most likely to return are headbutt, diving dig, and block push.
Depending on the
Those two
matchup.
are
Yeah.
those two are specific. Like these are super specific tools for the opponent that they're going to struggle against. And headbutt is headbutt.
Right.
Headbutt is
And you don't particularly need a specific opponent to make headbutt work.
yeah. You
Right.
need an opponent sitting down against you.
Right. Yeah. No. Are you playing Exceed? Yes. No. If yes, play headbutt.
The only the only character I would be wary about losing headbutts into characters that specifically have speed dodges because 6 is an
Right.
awkward speed, and characters that have like range dodges.
Right. So watch out for Enkidu. Watch out for I don't know, Dan's Haugadoken or something like that, or
Yeah,
Linne's Elusive Flash or something like that.
Reese,
Yep.
checkmate.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay. And I mean, like if you don't yet have a headbutt in your discard, obviously like Burrow Dig is a perfectly good card. Like just use that as
yeah,
the attack, and then you've got your headbutts for later anyway.
yep. Or if you're before exceed mode and you've got time, you've been forced to discard a diving dig or whatever reason it's in the discard. You could return that for tunneling.
Yeah.
You've
Sure.
not exceeded yet. It's an easy way to get some gauge.
Sure.
Now,
And
landing.
when
Hmm?
I'm sorry, when you were saying kind of that the early part of the game is a little bit less interactive, are those the kind of plays that
Yep.
you're talking about where you're like, okay, I get a gauge, I play a boost, I get a gauge again? Is that sort of what Mole Knight is looking to do in the early game, or is what
So
other kind of interactivity are you talking about when you say that?
so my early game as Mole Knight, my ideal early game as Mole Knight is I play I play a tunneling, I play two blocks, and I play a cross.
Okay.
So uh I play tunneling. So turn one, I put the barrel at range 3. Then the opponent strikes into me, and I play a block. And then I tunneling, and then I get to play a cross or a block, and then I play the other one. And then I've generated 4 gauge
4 gauge
without
right
doing
there.
anything.
And so like I was thinking about when you said you've probably dealt about 10 damage by the time you exceeded. And I was like, that seems
Yeah.
low. Whenever I played Mold Knight, I've exceeded much later in the game than that. That's why. That
Yeah,
you are
that's my ideal game.
sure.
But yeah, you want to use your blocks early because you've got a decent bit of armor in your kit. You got some on a boost, some on an ultra, some on an attack.
Right.
Um, you got a decent bit of armor, so you don't really need the block as much as you need the gauge.
Okay.
And then you're gonna want tunneling is uninteractive gauge generation, and then cross and headbutt are attacks that just freely generate you gauge. They hit
Right.
the opponent and then get you out for free.
They're barely
Uh,
interactive at the range you're probably playing them.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would prefer to play crossover headbutt because headbutt is 4 power, which becomes 6 when you're exceeded.
Right.
And gaining advantage, I think, is stronger in your exceed mode because
Right.
if you burrow strike into burrow strike, your opponent legally is allowed to flip the table.
Yes. Yep. In TTS, in real life, their own table, it doesn't matter. They can do
Yeah,
it.
in real life, they might leap the table,
Yep.
so just be careful.
Yep. That's possible
Uh,
too. So have a defensive card ready for when they attack you in real life.
yeah. So Mole Knight's biggest weakness, if you've been paying attention, is he only has an ability on Initiate, and his
Right.
cards are good, but they're not great defensive cards. Like the best defensive card in his kit is Belly Slide. Everything else you really want to be using proactively, not reactively.
Right.
So if the opponent is initiating into you, you need to have a plan for that because they're going to do it. If they know how to play against Mole Knight, they're going to be putting pressure on you.
Right.
I think he has trouble into the most recent seasons 5, 6, and 7, particularly 5 and 7, because they push the pace. They are offensive uh, seasons. The characters do a lot of stuff all at once,
Right.
which he can't do anything about. He has to capitalize when it's his turn. As Mole Knight, capitalize when it's your turn. Use your burrow, uh, play unreactable stuff, nonsense stuff, and then enforce terrifying mix-ups once you're exceeded.
Right.
You know, is it grasp or sweep with +2 power coming in at me? And another thing the opponent will do, they'll stand on your burrow. That's gonna happen.
Yeah.
It's um you're really just gonna have to deal with that. A good one is the spike thing I mentioned earlier. Initiate spike, declaring them before. If they play dive, okay, cool, they've beaten your spike, but at least your burrow's free.
Yep.
If they play assault, you hit them anyway, and you're on the burrow now, which is a lot easier to work around
Right. On
than
your
if
turn,
the
you can
opponent
still,
is.
yeah, you can do more things with it.
And if the opponent plays anything else, you just spike them.
Right.
Or they cross out, which that's the dream. They
Right.
cross
And
out.
now you've got your burrow. You've established a range that you're happy with.
Yep. And they take the 5. Like it's but they are going to stand on the burrow. A good opponent, it is just standing on the burrow will not be enough if you play Mole Knight well.
Okay.
Because once you exceed, you can move the burrow, and then they move on to it, and then you move it somewhere else,
But
and
you're
then
you're generating
you,
cards while they're doing it, and unless they're Ryu, they're losing cards from the move action probably, or at least going
and
card
even if
neutral.
they're Ryu, they're not generating resources doing that.
Right. Right.
So they are going to do that. It is not good enough to just stand on the burrow. If they can action compress and do it, like something and move on to the burrow, draw cards and move on.
Right. Land on the burrow
Put a boost in play.
from their in strike movement or something like that.
That's also really good. Yeah.
Right.
Same
Okay.
reason moving off the burrow is really good for you. Moving on to the burrow is really good for them.
Right.
If you can, so when you're playing against someone who knows how to play against Mole Knight, put the pressure on them. Advantage chain, you're not going to be able to play as safe a game against someone who knows how to play against Mole Knight.
Right.
It's unfortunate, but it's true. So play your assaults. Get your advantage, cross out, or there you are going to have to push the pace. You are going to have to try and play a slightly faster game plan than you would if the opponent isn't going to be standing on the burrow.
Right.
But if the opponent lets you, Mole Knight is monstrous. He's got an incredible economy. Many of his cards draw him cards. He's got decent power even without the bonus on his kit, on his exceed mode. And he's got range and functional action compression because he's placing the burrow and drawing cards.
And drawing cards, sure. And when you say that when your opponent lets you, he's monstrous, it like that isn't to say that when your opponent doesn't let you, he still can't, like Mole Knight can't still play the game. It's just that sometimes he'll have a crazy thing he can do when your opponent can't stop you from doing it.
Yeah. Like if your opponent is doing their best and they're taking all the right actions, they're moving onto the burrow properly, you've still got good cards. Headbutt is still a nonsense card. Belly Slide's still a focus like. You still have a range 1 spike. You still have an additional copy of Grasp.
Right.
Like, none of these things are bad. So that's a situation some people would say, oh, maybe you should look at the ultras more. I think you should still stay committed to the exceed mode, because once you get to the exceed mode, the freedom of positioning the burrow, suddenly the opponent's not always going to be able to move onto it.
Right.
So and in drawing all those cards from using your burrow, from setting your burrow and such, you're going to draw into EXs, and that's what I recommend you rely on for your defense.
Right. Sure.
because turns out EX attacks on defense are good.
Yep. Often.
Yeah. If the opponent doesn't have an answer to it as well, I find if the opponent, stands on the burrow and they're being a pain, if you spend some force and retreat, you're very much telegraphing block push, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like they have to, and then you block push them off it. They go, okay, it's my turn. I move back on, and then you move the burrow.
Yeah. So
So
they've either uh in the block push situation, they've either moved into inner to stop the block push. They've dove at you or something, and cool. Now they're off the burrow. Mission accomplished.
yeah,
Or you hit them and they move off the burrow. Or they play a focus and you're a little sad, but again, as we established later on, you'd really like
that
them to not have that focus.
that's a focus down, and then you go, okay. They do whatever they do on their turn, and then you go, okay. I'll move the burrow. So you make sure you move out before you play the block push to give you more options to place the burrow.
Right.
Typically, I use retreat, backstep, I think it is. Whatever the boost on assault is.
Yeah. Backstep.
Yeah. I typically use that to do it, just because it's resource efficient.
Right.
But, you have ultras to spend. You have other cards to spend. The card I think matters least for Mole Knight. It's a tough one. It depends on the matchup, but it is often block push. It's just a specific answer tool that is not always a question being asked.
Right.
But it's got Stonewall. Aside from the ultras, I think the ultras are actually the least consistently useful cards.
They're often just 2 force. Among the normals, you've mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned some fun interactions with Spike. You mentioned underslowing with focus. Obviously, grasp at range, whatever you want it to be, is kind of cool. Um, you also mentioned that
the silly dive stuff.
yes, yep, the silly dive stuff. You also mentioned that among like the normal boosts, you don't have a huge amount of need for light because of your crazy range shenanigans giving you basically effective speed.
Yep.
Is
And
that
also, I think you don't boost light because your range shenanigans mean your sweeps almost always hit, and then when you're exceeded, your sweeps almost always hit, and they're 8 power.
right? Right, of course. And
Yep.
so I'm just wondering, uh, is that less true? Is light more valuable if your opponent is very cognizant about staying on your burrow and you need or initiating into you and you need to play more defensively to stop them from doing that? Or is the threat of an 8 power sweep later in the game just that good?
So because the opponent's standing on the burrow and initiating into you, they're forcing you to play more neutral.
Right.
Because otherwise, Mole Knight skips neutral.
Right.
He plays a very distinctly Mole Knight shaped neutral, which
Right.
is the burrow setting and pressure.
Right. He's not
But
necessarily playing Exceed the way that another character would.
yeah, but if the opponent is pressuring you, they're standing on the burrow, you are going to play a more normal game of Exceed. You're going to play more normal Exceed neutral. So in that case, yeah, light is far more useful then. Because, the burrow's a 3, the opponent's standing on it, you boost light, and suddenly, you're actually a lot more threatening.
And then the other normals. So we've talked about Grasp. Fierce, I imagine, power is always good. Late in the game, you probably
Yeah,
doesn't need it that much, but another super fast option in the late game is always nice.
yeah. And sometimes the extra power in the late game's good too, because you have the redundant copies of of Grasp
Right,
through
in Burrow Dig, sure.
Burrow Dig, you having the ability to staple full power onto something and go dodge this.
Right.
Not something to scoff at. Yep. Um.
I'm just trying to think about any other and we talked about the utility of defend on certain attacks and where you would put them. I'm just trying to think of any other odd normal interactions. Cross, obviously, block, obviously we talked about. So
Yeah.
I think that's everything. Um,
If you're thinking about using parry, I would aim to parry your opponent. So the shape Mole Knight hates most of all is sweep with +0 to 1 range. So a sweep that caps out at range 4, because then suddenly your early game cross and such are a lot weaker.
Right.
So if your opponent has that or a way to use that, stop that.
Got it.
Don't. So parry can be useful there. Good example is the generic remless parry of Toxic Tendrils, which allows that to happen. You can't let that happen.
Got it. Okay. And also like, you know, block in the early game being such a useful card to generate gauge in the first place.
Yeah,
It needs to be a particularly scary card in order to justify the parry, it sounds like.
yeah, absolutely. If you can generate that extra gauge without doing like Mole Knight, I'm perfectly happy to turn one. Like after I set my burrow, the opponent does whatever on their turn. I'm perfectly happy to just initiate block, not moving in.
Right.
You know, they
Right.
dive in on me. It's no, I take a couple damage, but I get a gauge,
Right.
and that's
And that's better for you than the damage was for your opponent, probably.
probably yeah.
Got it. Okay. That'll make sense.
Yeah, I think Mole Knight is an early game monster and a late game monster. I think his weakest is his like mid game. You know, you after you after your hand that you've carefully mulliganed is less good, uh, and before you can exceed basically.
Right. Sure.
Once you've used up a couple cross and a couple blocks or whatever, suddenly your momentum slows down as you're looking for those other safe cards to get your gauge. But
Right.
in saying that, if you are like one gauge away and you don't have a perfectly safe, you don't have a cross or a headbutt or whatever, just play something fast. Just
Right.
come in and
Just
unless it's
try to
Zangief.
get gauge, yeah. Unless you're really going down on positioning or something by doing it, try to get some gauge somehow.
Yeah, that that last gauge is worth its weight in gold.
Right.
Like, and your opponent will try and kill you the turn after you exceed because you are giving up tempo to exceed.
Right.
So
And gauge, you
so
don't have the resources to threaten an ultra if you were somehow threatening an ultra.
yeah,
You're at your weakest right then.
yeah. So just be prepared for when that happens, either to just commit to lose the strike, or you play sneaky and you have something for them when they do it.
Right.
You're at
That
range
might be a
4 and
time
you
to
have
play. That might be a time to play that EX that you were holding because you generate so many cards or something.
yeah, absolutely.
Got it. Right,
Yeah.
that all makes sense. Any other? Well, first of all, any other considerations about Mole Knight himself that you want to bring up before we wrap up this episode? I have a couple more questions for you, but anything else that you want to mention?
So like I said, I like him into the slower seasons. I don't like him as much into the faster seasons. So depending on your metagame, Mole Knight may be more or less viable as a metagame choice. Obviously, depends on what the meta is.
Right.
But if if there is at all like a slower season or character that is strong and around in your metagame, I think he's very easy to learn and play and master, and very good check into those sorts of characters. So if you're struggling, you've got a team of a couple characters and you're struggling to handle those late game threats of like your season 2 characters or even some of your season 3 characters, uh I'd look into playing Mole Knight.
Right. What about characters in the more aggressive seasons that are a little bit lower tempo? I'm thinking about like I don't know, like Hakumen tends to give you a lot of turns over the course of the
Yep, yeah,
game.
he's good into Harkonnen because Harkonnen will let you do your thing.
Right.
Um,
So even among the more aggressive seasons, if you are struggling with specific matchups, he's a useful guy to bring.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. If I was in a scene where one person had like an absolute killer Harkonnen, I would I would absolutely, or like say the opponent has a really good Gold Lewis.
Right.
Yeah, I would go, okay, Mole Knight can easily fit into my 3.
Makes sense.
Uh, yeah, I think that's all the thoughts I had prepared off the top of my head.
Right, awesome. So the only other question that I have is, if somebody is a diehard Mole Knight fan already and is just watching this guide to get a sense of what they're missing about their game plan, what other characters like Mole Knight are there that they should be checking out? Or conversely, if they're a big fan of another character, um, and they've never looked at Mole Knight before, who would you say, oh,
Okay,
you're a big fan of this guy, check out Mole Knight?
so Mole Knight's a bit of a weird one because he goes from a hit and run character to a bruiser.
Right,
So his card shapes are heavy card shapes, brawler sort of stand in the pocket hit character.
right,
But his ability and his the way he uses them don't really represent that. If you like his Exceed mode, that late game heavy hit, out trade and win, I would look at your grapplers, someone like Ragnar, also Ragnar or Soul. If you like the front side, the sort of uh, disjointed hit and run stuff, trying to think. You got your puppet characters. They the burrow is essentially a kind of puppet.
right.
So characters like Zata, you got Carl Clover. Um, I think that's it. Oh no, I forgot that we have season 6 entirely. Um, sorry, I just deleted it from my brain.
I can't
I,
imagine why.
yeah, no, no thoughts, just head empty.
Yep,
But yeah, Mole Knight is a relatively unique character, to be honest. A, he's a character that has a strong economy. He's got permissive ranges, and he's got very impactful tools. His real only like negative to him is his reliance on initiation and positioning.
right,
So if you as a player really like to initiate strikes and you really like to fiddle around with like exact positioning, I think Mole Knight is for you.
perfect, awesome.
Uh, yeah.
I'm looking forward to giving him a couple more tries. I've tried him a few times. I've had limited success. I'm super excited to try that weird spike play. That sounds very fun.
Oh yeah, it's fun, and most of the time it just works. Like
Yeah,
it's
no,
yeah,
that's something that
uh,
I never would have thought of. That's cool.
yeah. People don't think about like, oh, that'd be like positioning negative. Why would I do that? Why would be losing speed there? Hell, you can even do it with sweep, just to retreat out.
Right,
Retreat out, hit for 6 or hit for 8. Though it is a bit more vulnerable to both of those scenarios are vulnerable to the opponent crossing, but who cares?
right,
You're always vulnerable to the opponent crossing. This
right,
is
and
Exceed.
that's one cross down probably. And if like this is actually something that I probably should have asked earlier. Like generally, it seems like because of the crazy range shenanigans that he can do, any situation where your burrow is between you and your opponent is advantageous for that reason. When it's behind you, it is for retreating or for doing things that hit at ranges where you're not at, like spike or something like that. Is that
Spike or
correct?
block push.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's technically it's advantageous for those, but those are very telegraphed things.
Right.
So I would be less comfortable with that unless I specifically have a plan.
Right.
Like if I'm out here and then I assault in and then I spike, you know, that's fine. That's a setup maneuver.
Right.
I know what I'm doing there. But if I end up at range 1 and the burrow's just behind me there, I'm a bit uncomfortable.
Right.
You typically want the burrow closer to the opponent or as close to the opponent as you are.
Right. Got it.
So
Yep.
like
Pretend I
it's
asked that
okay if the
question. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay if the burrow's at the same range as the opponent wants you, because if you initiate and move to it, it's the same thing. Like
Right.
you haven't. But if you've got like exceed mode, it's the same thing, but you've got +2
But
power.
+2 power, right?
Yeah.
Now, pretend I asked that question much earlier in the lesson because that seems important. But that's definitely a consideration. That's good to know. With characters like this who are kind of weird and unique, getting yourself into the mindset of, all right, you're not just playing Exceed, you're sort of playing this other mini game, I think can be difficult. So figuring out things like that is definitely
Yeah.
relevant. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're playing when you play Mole Knight, you are playing the mole game. It's
Right.
on the opponent to force you to not.
To make you play Exceed.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. And a good opponent will do it. So just because you're playing Mole Knight doesn't mean that you can avoid playing Exceed.
Yeah. Nor should you be looking forward to
Right.
exceed rules.
Yeah, Exceed is fun. Yeah, I feel like that's a pretty good sentiment to end it on. So, Reggie, thank you so much. I really appreciate the lesson. I'm looking forward to giving Mole Knight more tries. Um,
No. Yeah, all good. Thank you for having me.
yeah, absolutely. And everybody else, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. Tell me more about Mole. Tell me all the things that we missed. And I will talk to you later. Bye, everybody.
Bye.